Apologize for the belated start. I'll call this meeting to order at 7:13 p.m. and we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So for people that aren't familiar, this is a workshop meeting, which means we are going to be addressing one topic. The topic, the work session tonight will be K-12 Counseling Services Study, the committee's report and their recommendations. As a result, everything tonight will just be about this topic, and public comments are after the fact, after the presentation, and public comments are limited to just the workshop topic. So I'll turn the floor over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the board is aware that this undertaking was one of the priority implementation steps that you approved for the 18-19 school year. And due to the press of other business on your schedule and the amount of time necessary to devote to this, we're receiving the report and recommendations from the committee tonight. We're going to do something a little different with this tonight. Given how comprehensive some of this is and the board interest that has been expressed in this topic in the past, we're going to present the committee's recommendations tonight, look for your feedback, and then the report will follow. The written report will follow for adoption by the board at your October business meeting. And that would be important from a phasing standpoint as well. But we'd also like that report to reflect any feedback that you have tonight as a result of what you hear. So I'm going to turn this to the co-chairs, Yvette Gorovich and Jim Martinez. We have a number of our ACE counselors here tonight who have contributed heavily to the material that you will that is going to be reviewed with you.
Good evening. Is Ralph behind me? Yes.
Sometimes we need Ralph.
He's way behind you.
Ralph to the rescue.
I know my laptop.
So the board has hard copy in front of you. Some of this is quite dense. In that it's going to be the basis for the written report. So you might want to follow along as opposed to straining your eyes.
And I'm also going to provide you some of the source guides that we used in our work. We do have copies for everyone.
I should also mention that Julie Corbett served as the board liaison to this committee and was very helpful in directing its work.
So this has been almost a year of thinking and working, and we've realized that this department has not had professional development or thought about the primary tasks that school counselors should be doing in probably 2 decades. So it was a wonderful opportunity to meet with the school counselors and all of the stakeholders and really think about the wonderful resources that we have and how we can best serve our students. So here are the recommendations. I was supported in this work by my co-chair, James Martinez, who will speak about the charge, what got us started, and recognize the members of the committee and the people that are here.
Mr. Martinez is himself a school counselor, which gives him a very good position for this.
So I can't believe that we're actually at this point when we reviewed these and developed these charges. But I'm just going to review them briefly, and then I'm going to transition into introducing some of the members of the committee and proudly introduce our consultant. And when we get to that, you'll understand why. But the School Counselor Redesign Committee, the charges were very clear and very specific. And the number one charge was to review the benchmark current roles and responsibilities of school counselors here in the district. It included reviewing best practices of all the national standards, the American School Counselor Association being a major one, both national, state, and regionally. We conducted, and one of the charges also was to conduct focus groups, which, as you know, were done over a series of weeks with students and counselors and teachers and parents, et cetera. Differentiating roles and responsibilities was also something that took a lot of time to really discuss, because of all the moving parts that go into the role that they play in schools, both K through 12. I'm on number 5 right now. Just the college piece, the ongoing tasks that go on with all the activities the students have at each grade level, trying to include pre-college experiences and visits. Number 6, defining the role of the counselors in relation to the capstone requirement. Number 7, the personalized student success plans, which was made into legislation, I believe, in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, the Public Act 1742. Number 8, examine the Connecticut Comprehensive School Counseling Framework Model, which Dr. Stuart Chen Hayes, who I'm going to introduce shortly, is going to go through very carefully. Number 9, to recommend counselors to student ratios at each level based upon regional, state, and national norms and accreditation of requirements. And the last one, number 10, to develop a multi-year comprehensive plan for professional development, which some of it began during the summer with the counselors, and it was very successful, including a systematic plan for recruitment and retention of highly qualified school counselors, provision of clinical supervision and coaching of school counselors necessary to implement the redesign recommendations. So tonight we're going to be, this is all the work that's culminated and we're going to be presenting for you tonight.
And this, of course, was Superintendent Adamowski's charge to the committee. The committee was formed. So we actually have some of the committee members here tonight. I want to just direct your attention to the audience back here. We have Dawn Leeds at Brigham Young Man High School.
Would you stand when Jim mentions your name, please? And
Daniel
just remain
Sullivan,
standing for a minute.
Well, he's since become the assistant principal, but he started out in the committee as head counselor over at Norwalk High. Phoebe Fallon, Rafael Tejada from Polis. Phoebe Fallon was over at Nathan Hale. And we also have Julie Corbett, which Dr. Adamowski mentioned was one of our committee members as well as a Board of Ed representative. Counselors that participated in the professional development, John Castelluzzo. Did I pronounce that correctly? No. Thank you. Also school counselor at Brigham Young Man High School. MJ Corona as a parent representative. We also have Daniela Kimmich, Brigham Young Man High School counselor. And student who participated in the focus group, Serenity, Taylor. Executive Director of Norwalk Act, Anthony Allison. He's right next to MJ there. And acknowledging also Barbara Meyer Mitchell, who participated and sat in some of our committee meetings, and we appreciate your support. Did I get everybody?
You got everybody that's here. The other members are on your screen and in the packet. And thank you.
And thank you to all of you.
So if you Google in any way Dr. Chen Hayes, you'll get a variety of different bios for him. And so in speaking with him a few moments ago, I was trying to find one that was short, sweet, and to the point, because if you find the one on his webpage, I mean, with the body of work that he has been able to accomplish, it goes on and on and on, and I say that with pride. But I will read to you sort of a brief one that encapsulates what he's doing overall. Dr. Stuart Chen Hayes is professor and program coordinator, counselor education, school counseling at Lehman College of the City University of New York. He is a formal middle school, college, mental health, family, and sexuality counselor. He is school counseling redesign consultant for the City of Norwalk, Connecticut, and has consulted with school counseling transformation in districts Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania with the University of Pennsylvania's Equity and Excellence Consortium. He is co-author of 101 Solutions, which is the book that was passed around. 101 Solutions for School Counselors and Leaders in Challenging Times. with Doctors Melissa Ackerman and Aaron Mason, author of Double Dads, One Teen, God bless, a queer family's trailblazing life in the USA and Taiwan, and co-authored the forthcoming Mandarin version in 2020 with Dr. Lance Jen Hayes. You should also know that Dr. Jen Hayes, as Dr. Adamowski said, I am a school counselor. Earlier in my career, I was a high school counselor and also a director of school counseling in the high school in New York. And I'm also a former student of Dr. Chen Hayes. So he's not only my former professor, mentor, advisor, but now colleague. So I'm proud to introduce Dr. Chen Hayes as consultant of the Norwalk Public Schools redesign. Thank you.
Our work began with a commission of a Hanover research study. We've shared this before, and the report contains several key findings and recommendations which also guided our work. They suggested that we align Norwalk's school counseling program with the ASCA model, that school counselors should devote 80% of their time in direct student services, including classroom-based lessons, small group, individual counseling, and advisory activities. That the school counseling program must support the mindset necessary for college readiness, career readiness, by helping students to develop annual goals, participating in work-based learning, internships, and community service that fits in very well with our capstone aspirations. Ensure equity for underrepresented groups, assign counselors to support college and career readiness across a K-12 setting, which is a new thought for us. Assign the same school counselors across grades 9 through 12 for continuity. And finally, to use student data and data on post-secondary outcomes to monitor the effectiveness of program. All of these recommendations fit into our recommendations this evening. Stuart?
Good evening. I've been so busy here in Norwalk, I have yet to get to the ocean, so I'm really glad to have the ocean behind you. It helps to remember where we are. All right, so the committee was formed, and then I was hired, and the goal is to really collect data from all sorts of different stakeholders. So we really wanted to hear from students, from parents and guardians, especially from school counselors about what's working, what's not, what would you like to keep, what would you like to change. And so in our 3-year redesign, we wanted to make sure that we are evidence-based and data-focused as we go through. So our first meeting was March 28th with the superintendent, and I was just in the process of being hired. And then after that, we developed a collective school counseling definition, a school counselor definition for Norwalk Public Schools, a mission statement and a vision statement that Rafael Tejada was wonderful at giving us the draft. So I want to shout out the appreciation for Rafael's leadership and advocacy. And then we began the process of shaping the instruments for collecting the data. On May 9th, we created our online school counseling program survey that is going out to students. On the 23rd, we developed our focus group schedule so that we could have in-person direct meetings with smaller groups of stakeholders. And we developed our summer professional development mini conference for school counselors, our first ever in Norwalk Public Schools history. On June 6th, we finalized the summer PD schedule, and we did data collection updates on what we had gathered so far. On the 12th, we developed new school counselor job description and the role of the proposed director of school counseling. And on the 19th, we developed board recommendations, which are now being given in this meeting, discussed caseloads, and future elementary school counselors. And so, the school counselor defined for Norwalk Public Schools, a master's level certified educator and counselor who provides academic, career, college, post-secondary 3 A's, access, affordability, and admission, and emotional social skills, including executive order skills. The acronym is ACCESS for all students annually in a school counseling program. And so our focus group survey question categories included the current and ideal role of school counselors, What are the strengths of the school counseling program in each of the middle and high schools, and what improvements are needed? And most importantly, what's missing from school counseling programs? And then we look at the core key skills and competencies. School counselor delivery of academic skills, so is organization, time management, study skills, academic goal setting occurring? How are school counselors monitoring achievement gaps, grades, test scores, and focusing on equity in terms of course selection? School counselor delivery of career skills. How are student career interests, skills, aptitudes, and strengths developed over time? What's it like to have the career key and interest profiler assessments in 8th and 9th grade? How are school counselors helping students create resumes, cover letters, doing job shadowing, career internships, mock interviews, career fairs and speakers, and focusing on labor market data and the occupational outlook? And how are school counselors delivering college access, affordability, admission skills? Are they helping all students build strong college lists, doing college visits, meeting with college reps, writing strong essays, starting post-secondary college planning in middle school, if not before, advocating for low-debt college post-secondary choices, completing FAFSA profile and Connecticut state aid forms, and comparing financial aid packages? And then school counselor delivery of social and emotional skills. Are school counselors helping all students develop stress management skills, multicultural and diversity skills, anti-bullying and anti-violence skills, and mental health prevention skills? So it's time to hear what middle school students said. And so Serenity and I are going to alternate the actual comments of middle school students. Then when we're done, Serenity's going to give a little bit of a statement of her summarizing the process. All right, you ready? All right, here we go.
Some of the middle school students said, I don't know what the counselors do, but they're always busy. And a lot of people overlook the counselors and underestimate their role in the school.
It's not fair to have them swarm to student schedule changes. Never talked about college.
School counselors should help students with serious issues.
They should add drop-in hours so anyone can come by at some point in the day.
They should schedule appointments.
School counselors should run advisory.
It would be great if counselors came in to do classroom lessons on organization, time management, study, and test-taking skills.
Students would like school counselors to be academic advisors all the way through on goals, plans, not only if there's an issue or problem, more proactive all the way through.
Students want help with resumes, cover letters, interviews, internships, shadowing, career fairs, and career speakers.
Gifted and talented students learned about college access admission from their gifted and talented teachers, but no one else did.
Students would like lessons on mental health intervention/prevention, including stress management, hate, anti-violence, issues of oppression, racism, and stigma.
And we heard from high school students, and as you know, this has been an extremely difficult weekend in this community, plus for high school students. So I'm going to ask one of the high school counselors to come up and be the voice of one of the students and alternate with me. Doesn't have to be Dawn, but it looks like it's going to be Dawn. All right. All right. So Dawn and I are going to represent the high school student voices.
No more switching schools counselors, please. Students should loop all the way with the same counselor.
I like how school counselors push the students to want more for themselves, congratulate and applaud students in trying harder classes, applying to more challenging colleges. It's nice to know that they encourage us and are proud of our accomplishments.
Poor job of encouraging students to use the College Career Center. Many students have never met with a college rep.
Both high school school counseling departments should be more consistent. One high school is doing so with junior year meetings and is on target, the other is not.
School counselors don't focus enough on academic goals.
School counselors and teachers often blame students for academic performance issues that were really underlying untreated mental health and/or disability issues.
School counselors should advocate for more flexibility in test cutoffs. It's an equity issue.
I wanted a face-to-face discussion with the school counselor about my life directions goals. Typing on a computer and filling out survey answers isn't the same.
I'm interested in applying early decision colleges, but with the changes in school counselors and meetings not occurring with them until late September, early October for seniors, this is way too late.
College planning should start sophomore year.
There's been no help with college affordability.
No help on social and emotional skills, mental health prevention, anti-violence, multicultural diversity, other than individual issues. Would like systemic focus on all of the above.
So we heard from our parents as well, and Patty, if you could.
Good evening, everyone. Before I go into what parents said at the focus group, this was the last one, and I attended this one, and the greatest part of this process was listening to the students and the counselors and the parents and other stakeholders and finding common themes. So as I go through this, you'll definitely hear some of the common themes that we actually, all of them are tied into the recommendations. So what our parents said: currently school counselors are schedulers, standardized test coordinators, and proctors, and that's all they have time for, and it's not fair for them. They need extra supports for students from low income and or low resource families. School counselors need to be able to show their effectiveness and their results from interventions, model fidelity, need early college access information in elementary and middle school, and as freshman and sophomore years of high school. There's actually more college access information at the end here. School counselors are accessible, hardworking, responsive, more with students. Given too much administrative responsibility, keeps them from doing intervention and counseling. It should be more proactive, not reactive. Crisis inundated with paperwork. We get little communication about school counseling programs. Websites are awful and no one updates them. College access is self or parent driven, not a good thing. One common theme was P-TECH is a model for all others on career and college. Very pleased. No help with college affordability other than one financial aid night in late high school.
And our school counselors that are here, I should report that Phoebe reported to us that she implemented a classroom-based skills program today, and she's feeling really great.
We've already started implementing even without full approval yet.
So, good evening. Some of the concerns that we had, we do too many things.
We are pulled everywhere.
We do 1 to 3 hours a day of crisis intervention.
We're investigating discipline.
We are busy with bus, cafeteria, hallway, and lunch duty.
We're overseeing scheduling and proctoring testing.
IT support for Power School.
Scheduling. Did I mention scheduling?
Yeah.
Coordinating 504 meetings.
Very little time for counseling and classroom lessons.
Need for a content credit class for school counseling curriculum. Advisory run by teachers, not enough, nor it is the former study hall period.
The data that was gathered from the school counselors, almost all school counselors are doing at most 10% counseling, 10% classroom lessons, 20% advising, planning with students during an average week.
50% or more of the time is non-counseling work, and school counselors want their work to be focused on what they are trained to do, trained for, which is direct counseling, advising, and educating our students.
It's interesting because the ASCA model says that even when you have favorable caseloads, if school counselors aren't supported and supervised and coached to do that 80%, you're not going to have an effective school counseling program with the outcomes that is the promise to our community and the promise of this Board of Education. So we have a vision and we have a mission.
Can I ask a question, if you don't mind?
Sure.
On the 50% non-counseling work, Are there provisions in state law in Connecticut or union contracts that apply to counselors that would prevent, would prohibit this kind of being pulled every which way from your assignment?
Without well-established and accepted roles and responsibilities, they become the everything go-to person. You will note later on in the presentation, we recommend a revised job description. Our last job description was for guidance counselors. That's how long ago our job description was updated. So we do have roles and responsibilities and deliverables in the new job
But
description.
are there any kind of state statutes or union provisions in union contracts that prohibit being dragged every which way?
Not currently.
No, I think this is, there are implications here for our administrators, right? So we have, let's take our high schools, for example. We have 5 full-time 12-month administrators in each school who should be responsible for the scheduling of their schools. Our tradition has been that the counselors do it. Now, we go back 20 years to when guidance counseling was alive and well in a highly tracked high school, and that was one of the jobs of the counselors, to sift and sort and put everybody in the right place. That has evolved over the years to actual counseling, to the point where the state has dropped the guidance designation entirely. It's no longer recommended by any of the national associations or experts in this area. And the whole premise here is, as with many areas that we've dealt with, is to make up for the last 20 years and come into the mainstream and start doing things in a way that meets contemporary standards and contemporary student needs.
From your work, is it generally, this is across the board at all the schools, what's being done, being dragged every which way?
From our work with the school counselors, Stuart, you'll see the artifact a little bit later, actually asked for time studies of what we're doing with our school counselors' time across the board, that 50% or more or less than 50% on direct school counseling was pretty consistent across the board.
Just as an aside, this may, I hope it's one of the last times where I'm reminded of the initial discussion that you and I had on intervention programs and the lack of intervention programs where people's jaws dropped. This is a situation that cannot be allowed to continue. It's just unconscionable. And I'm certainly glad that we're moving on this.
If I could just kind of piggyback on what Bruce had been mentioning, but to me, it's alarming that 50% of your work is non-counseling work. Counselors are not actually doing the actual counseling. And I know that we have, and I know personally many of our counselors, especially at Norwalk High School, since my children have gone through, are amazing and really, really work hard and are really student-driven and are there for our students. So we appreciate all that you do. But I wanted to ask a question. As far as like the bus, cafeteria, hallway, lunch duty, and even Dan, you can answer this as well. I know that a lot of teachers and staff are pulled in different directions, and you have bus duty, cafeteria duty, lunch duty. Is that on a rotating schedule? So you'll have certain staff members, let's say school counselors, helping out in that area? Is that a couple times a week? Is it every day? How much time is taken? Because it doesn't say here with some of our concerns, it doesn't actually show how much time is taken from your position as counselor, school counselor.
Usually varies by the building in terms of what the roles are.
Let's say Norwalk High School, for example.
Norwalk High School, I think, for example, we don't have a secretary for the College and Career Center.
Right.
So we staff that with the rotation. So essentially, folks are being pulled out of their office and come to the Career Center and do those clerical capacities, for example. I know, for example, they cover.
But what about like the everyday, like lunch duty, bus duty? Like how often is that taking you away from actually working with students directly?
For those duties, I'd say, 2 hours a week.
Okay, average per
And
counselor?
that is different in different
Right, I'm just using
schools.
Norwalk High as an example, but
Middle schools, some of them were daily. And as part of our contract negotiation that we've just completed, there was a very strong recommendation that was accepted, that interventionists, including school counselors and specialists and speech pathologists, not be assigned those non-instructional duties. We have our highest trained staff that should be directed at more intensive work with students, whereby other staff members can pick up that routine duty. So, they're getting back to Bruce's question about, are there some contractual issues? Now there is with regard to the interventionists, of which the school counselors are considered.
And just quickly, with that being said, it's also nice, you have a certain amount of students at, let's say, the high school, at Norwalk High School, having that face-to-face, but also kind of popping in during lunch, kind of popping in during bus. All that interaction is also, it's not on test scores, but seeing that face-to-face interaction periodically, I think is huge, but it's not, at the same token, the flip side of that, it takes away from children or students coming in for counseling. And we know, we've discussed that, how important that is, especially starting in 9th and moving through 12th grade.
So the
Yvette,
vision,
before you move on, can I just bring up one other issue, which it wasn't really addressed in the handout, maybe there's a better time to address this, but if I'm not mistaken, counselors are in the NFT and the teachers union.
Correct.
And our review, their review is under a seed model for teachers.
correct.
accurate?
And currently, the building principals are responsible for that observation and evaluation. And you'll see in this model that we are recommending moving that to a director with specialty in counseling services. So there is an opportunity within the evaluation unit, and we do it for other areas of specialty, to look to see which of the indicators are part of the deliverable of that specialist. So it may not be every classroom deliverable. Some of them are appropriate.
As you can see on page 17, our ratios are the best among other districts our size. The problem is with what the counselors are assigned to do. And also, this with the lack of, or what has been a historic lack of clinical supervision. Clinical from a standpoint of an expert in the area who can provide assistance, coaching, as well as evaluation. So, this is an effort to ratchet this up to best practice and current standards.
So if the board will let me get to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So you see the vision, I'm not going to read it, but that we are talking about social emotional learning, college and career and post-secondary readiness, and the social and emotional domains. In terms of the vision, it is a data-driven, partnering with members of the school and the community, creating opportunities that foster cooperation, share responsibility, promote and celebrate diversity, so that students become successful lifelong learners, developing competencies from a robust school counseling program, curriculum, annual planning with every child, and group and individual counseling. So, as we learned from Stewart, following the ASCA model, there was a very strong recommendation.
Our goal is for 80% of school counselor time to be spent in services to students, primarily direct and also indirect. So the direct services are counseling lessons in the classroom, group counseling, individual counseling, and that annual plan for every student. Indirect services, collaboration, referral, consultation. 80% of every school counselor's week should be doing that and that alone. So we're collecting data. I have about 80% of these now from the 31 school counselors. We ask for a calculator of time, and I ask for 5 days worth of this. And what we want to see is almost all of the work on the left-hand side, in direct services, indirect, Right now, almost every school counselor has the majority in the far right column, which is non-school counseling tasks. So my hope is to collect that data again at the end of the year and see what kind of a difference that we have.
On the data, can I ask a question that relates to this, if you don't mind? Did you do any do you have any data on what percentage of students at the high school level or middle school level go through the year without ever seeing a counselor, or how often what the average is times they see a counselor? Do you have a
We
counselor?
developed that survey asking many of those questions. That survey is out in the buildings. We have not gotten that back, and that will be part of the final report to the board. From our focus groups, we are finding that on a regular basis, they're not seeing their counselors regularly. They've identified when they seek out their counselors for a scheduling problem. If there is an interpersonal crisis brewing, they have a relationship, they'll go there. But on a regular basis, it's our hypothesis that the survey will support what we've learned from the focus groups, that we need to change this so that there is direct weekly content.
So the students have been surveyed.
Correct.
Among the questions, when was the last time you saw a counselor? How often do you see a counselor?
How often and why?
And those surveys are now in the buildings.
They will be going out, they
They're
are in the buildings. they're
Why
going-
aren't they here? Why are they sitting in the buildings?
We haven't finished collecting them yet.
Okay.
We just released it. We were timing it with other important surveys that were happening in the community at the same time.
Mhm.
We didn't want to make people survey weary, so we were strategic in
And I
when we
think there was a
released it.
problem with Power School, and a lot of the homerooms in the high school did not start up as early as they usually do, which is, or advisory, whatever, house, which I think is where they were giving the surveys, correct?
Yes.
And they were a couple weeks behind. That impacted bus passes and a number of issues.
Okay.
Why it was behind schedule, I don't know.
My guess is the anecdotal evidence that you already have gleaned is probably just as accurate as the data, or more accurate.
I believe so. That's our hypothesis.
Yes.
As Dr. A indicated, you have in front of you information based upon the June 2019 enrollment. See all of our schools, the number of counselors, their average caseload. We are cautioned not to make decisions solely on caseload. It does depend upon the intensity of student needs that vary from building to building or student to student. We've also provided for you information, current information, on the numbers of social workers, school psychologists, and the on-site community-based agencies currently in our building. When you look at this, you may say this is an enormous investment, but I must tell you that last night it took a phone call and 3 emails to press out our grief counseling work into our buildings, because people are trained and are ready, and it's this kind of community-based support coupled with our highly trained clinical staff members and our school counselors that are in the throes of training that allow us to respond to the day-to-day, to our aspirational goals, and during times of trauma and sadness and grief that we are experiencing at this very moment.
Yvette, for the final report, could we include CGS in this chart?
Certainly.
Thank you.
And this was this information comes out of the Hanover report that was released in January 2019. Its source information is from the State Department of Education from 16-17. We know we've seen growth, but nonetheless, it does allow us to compare this, our own caseloads, average caseloads, with that of our neighboring and regional districts. Please note that this includes not solely school counselors, but social workers and school psychologists as well. Barbara?
I'm wondering if we could break this data further for the final report to delineate which districts are investing where, whether it's the school counselor, the social worker, the school psychologist. And from what I've understood from talking to other people in our region, they're also including that college and career position as well if they have it in their district. So I think it would be helpful to see where those numbers are falling in various communities, if there's
We can
bandwidth.
attempt to get that data from
Thank you.
our colleagues.
Can I, again on the data and on the charts, if you don't mind, I'm still a little bit at a loss here. I'm looking at the 132. Take Stanford or Danbury. Danbury's not that unlike Norwalk in terms of, forget socioeconomic benchmarks, in terms of demographics and size. And I know they have different facilities, the way they set up their facilities are different, but the ratio, how do you have difference 187 and 132? That to me, if I'm missing something, tell me. A lot of our students are falling through the cracks and are not getting counseling services. Is that an accurate conclusion based on this data?
Yes,
Okay, not getting counseling services.
yes.
Okay.
And we are recommending significant changes.
Um,
Going the wrong way.
I think that there are very big financial differences in that comparison. Stanford spends $1,800 more per student than we do. Danbury spends significantly less.
12,000.
Yeah.
Right, so I think when you compare us to Stanford, you see that a greater proportion of our budget dollars are going into counseling, which makes this study, this report and recommendations much more compelling, given the investment that our community is making.
So there are 8 recommendations and priorities that we put before the board. It is in a 3-year rollout plan, and I'll get into the weeds in a moment. But the 8 include relieving the school counselors of non-school counseling duties. We've already spoken about that. To establish the director of school counseling position to supervise, evaluate, train, and coach. We are suggesting hiring 2 career and college access affordability admission specialists. We're recommending that at the paraprofessional level. It doesn't necessarily need to be a paraprofessional, but at that level, a bachelor's level, either an intern or someone aspiring to join our school counseling program. And that person will fully staff a comprehensive college and career counseling center. The centers exist, the personnel do not. We will implement the access and accomplishments plan to close the opportunity gap and ensure that every student has an annually updated plan in grades 6 through 12. We'll implement the student success skills. Stuart, can you speak a bit about that, please?
Student success skills. Oh, we have a visual. Awesome. It's also later in the deck. Is the best evidence-based set of school counseling curriculum lessons in the country. 20 research studies. You can go to studentsuccessskills.com and see the studies. Show a substantial increase in student test scores, grades, and reduction of behavioral incidents when students have been through the 5 to 7 lessons delivered by school counselors. And so it's the best thing in the field, and we've brought it to Norwalk.
And part of that, it's not listed here, but we were also discussing, based on the student success skills and social emotional skills, partnering with our community organizations, the Norwalk Acts, other not-for-profits within the community, aligning what the counselors are going to the classroom and teaching with parent and family workshops at the same time, not during the same time then, but evening workshops, and how that could actually kind of bring that all together.
Like stools on a bench, legs on a stool. You can't just do the student without doing the home, without doing.
Right. We're looking to fully implement the ASCA model by year 2, and then move into a point where we are at national gold standard levels by year 3. Continue to provide intensive PD from national and regional experts, and begin to consistently message the role of the school counselor, our school counseling program, throughout language, forms, phone trees, all of that routine work and have that all accessible on the website. There is a list for you in your deck about the appropriate and inappropriate counseling and non-counseling activities. You'll recognize some of them. This comes right out of the ASCA national model. So the 3-year plan.
Yvette, if we could just take a pause and see if board members have any questions on anything that has been presented so far.
Well, I think we probably need to hear the 3-year plan, and then we can tease it out.
So we will have the robust K-12 plan. We've already begun to build capacity, as you heard, through the PD in the summer. We are looking at 1920 as year 1, because in fact, we've already begun. We've done the PD, and as you've heard from Phoebe, they are, with support, beginning to implement, and we will work to establish those clear roles and responsibilities with building leaders. Year 2 will address the changes in supervision, work with the board to create the director's position, staffing the college and career centers at both comprehensive high schools, and begin to support, or actually fully implement, a model in which the middle school counselors will be providing 3 classroom-based counseling lessons to their feeder schools for all 5th grades. This is a major lift in terms of the grade 5 to 6 transition, major outcome of new Norwalk acts, and begins to address some of that slide academically and socially that we see in that transition from 5th to 6th grade. And then year 3, fully implement. By that time, we will have assessed staffing and caseloads and have a budgetary understanding of how do we staff an elementary school model through some reassignment, through feeder school, and how do we build budget, if in fact needed, to support some additional counselors at the elementary school. Yes, Bruce?
A 3-year plan sounds familiar, and I
Yes.
remember how we did the sped turnaround. And I know it was very beneficial for other city agencies and departments to have a very clear couple pages on costs, what we're getting into. And we made the decision, and based on that, we made decisions on how to fund it. Often, as you know, budgets get very messy as we start moving money from here to there and every which way. And it would seem to me, if sooner rather than later, if we could devise some kind of overall a budgetary plan that could be financed possibly from within the normal operating budgets, or some kind of special mechanism where it would be funded perhaps in a way similar to how we funded the sped turnaround, that might be helpful. But I think if the Finance Committee, Brian, if a presentation could be made sooner rather than later, where we have an idea. Year 1, we need this. Year 2, we need that. And then when we have a clear idea, we sit down with the funding agencies in the city, and we decide the best way to do it.
Excellent.
Whether it's part of the operating budget, or maybe it's a special fund.
Thank you. Thank you. Year 1 is relatively no cost.
Well, just to be a little sensitive to this too, I think we also need an approach of looking at this as possibly an attrition model. I see resources and some suggested capacity, and I don't think that needs to happen immediately, but over time, this is where we need to be in a decade or so.
However we do it, I just, instead of, I know we have a dialogue going, but, apologies. Allowing things to just float here and there, I don't think is a good way to deal with it. We should have a clear idea of where we are now, what we're spending now, where we plan to go. It's not a surprise on the Board of Estimate, the mayor, council. It's not a surprise for us. This is a need. We went through almost a 20 to 25-year period with special ed because we never had anything on paper except a lot of reports, a lot of discussion, and it was just never focused. Here's what we need, here's what it costs, and sitting down and doing that. So however we do it, if we decide to do it through attrition, hey, I'm fine with that. That's the best way to do it if we can. But I think the funding issue is not something that's ancillary to what we're doing now. It's integral, so that when people, members of the council or the BET that are going to watch this on YouTube, they're going to have an idea in 6 months what we are talking about, what the cost is to the city, and so will taxpayers.
So let me get into the year 1, year 2, year 3 specifics, and then we can put budgetary expectations next to that. So in year 1, as I said, we have already begun. There were 3 days of professional development. You want to talk about that? And this was done through small consulting contracts with the experts, and we utilized some Title IV funding for the design, so it was within budget available.
It was an amazing 3 days, and we appreciate all the funding that was done for it.
And it actually began with a day devoted to aligning our existing counseling program with the ASCA model and going through all the artifacts that are needed so that we can actually be more proactive than reactive, which is what we are basically discussing here.
Day 2 was the author of the student success skills. He took all the counselors through the entire program so that we are now able to teach it. And I taught it today to 6th graders for day 1 of the 5 days, and then we do 2 booster lessons after a month and then another month. And it was fabulous. And the kids were completely engaged, and I'm very excited.
Something that every single middle school is actually doing. I'll be doing this next week. And the 3rd day was actually dedicated to discussing the adolescent brain as a way of the foundation for the coming up with anything that had to do with the executive functions, which is one of the things that our middle school students need the most.
Thank you. Throughout the year, we are establishing monthly district meetings consistent with contractual accessibility to the department. The school counselors will be establishing advisory councils in every school. School counselors, parent leaders, teacher leaders will review at the talent office the new job descriptions and monitor the plan that you saw in terms of outcomes, looking at what our pre-implementation year 1 data looks like and what the data is telling us in June. 2 additional PD days will be led by Dr. Chen Hayes. 6 more days are planned, and we'll be meeting, I'm sorry about that spacing there, as you can see, really focusing on college access and affordability, the social and emotional learning. And we are planning to have 6 team members presenting some of our work at a national conference.
Yvette, can you just briefly outline what the structure for the advisory councils are? Is that like a subcommittee of the SGC, or is it a separate?
Pinch hitting for Yvette here. The School Counseling Program Advisory Council is spelled out in the ASCA model. It's designed to be a twice-a-year event at a minimum, and it is for each of the major stakeholders to be able to review the data, the outcomes, the plans, the goals for the school counseling program. So it's a building leader, the school counselors, a teacher, a parent or guardian, a student, a school social worker, a school psychologist. And they come together to look at what are your goals, what are your interventions, what's the baseline data, what are your wants and needs, what do you need help with. Folks do their interventions, come back then in the spring, look at results, outcomes, plan for the following year.
I'm just wondering how it would actually apply to Norwalk. We choose those people from our current SGC so that they have some bearing on what the SGC is also working on, or is it a separate?
Not necessarily. The SGC generally would be separate. It might have some similar folks, but not necessarily. This is an attempt to, and a chance to potentially get additional leaders and advocates involved beyond the SGC, but it doesn't hurt to have at least one SGC person if they parallel in what's going on.
Thank you.
Year one was minimal cost. It was the cost of the PD and the texts and the manuals. Year two, we're looking at establishing and identifying the budget. We could do that earlier rather than later in terms of a director of school counseling. We would be budgeting for 2 of that bachelor's level paraprofessional staff to fully staff and open the college career access, affordability, admission counseling centers at both high schools. And you see what the deliverable of that person would be. It really shocked me the first time I had the pleasure of speaking to this board before I joined Norwalk. And I learned the need to really support all students through this process, and it is a priority that we need to deliver on.
Just my point again, we will be discussing this in a couple months.
Yes.
And that's my point about what I say sooner rather than later, how we want to fund, how it's going to be funded.
And we know the cost of year 2 recommendations now. They're not up on the screen, but we can determine what those will be. We want to look at the best practices for school counseling caseloads, and if we're going to be doing any reassignments in terms of equity, in terms of piloting some elementary schools, we will be doing that. We'll fully implement the ASCA model. You've heard about the 5th to 6th grade lessons for the transition support that will support our feeder schools. We're talking about some specialty transitions, perhaps a dual language middle school house, so that counselor would work with students in the 5th grade feeder, for example. We're talking about reinvigorating our college fairs and really putting the time and support into them. We could clearly have the best opportunities for families in the region, if not the state. We'll continue with the professional development and our monthly meetings. It was pretty amazing to me that this department had not been meeting as every other department meets on a regular basis, and they were very happy to come together, and them shake their heads, to come together and talk about best practices. And then we are encouraging our school counselors to join the national model, the national organizations and the state organizations, so that they can stay on top of the gold standard of school counseling programs.
Are we paying for that membership?
We haven't discussed that yet. You know, we'll take a look at that.
Would certainly help.
That may be a contractual discussion. At some point, we need to cost that out. Some activity from the summer. And then year 3.
From these student success skills, and the children are doing that already too.
Board members could do it too, but we're running a little bit.
And then in year 3, it would be to assess the budget and how to fund the elementary school counseling program. We're certainly not advocating for a full-time counselor in every elementary school. Caseloads would not support that. We need to also look at what the deliverable is compared to our social workers and working together. We're thinking that a school counselor meets the needs of all children, whereas other clinical support staff members, mental health staff members may meet the needs of some children or a few children, depending upon the intensity of their needs. And by year 3, which is in 2 years from now, we would like to be able to apply to be a recognized ASCA model fully implementing the gold standard of school counseling services.
Heidi?
Can I ask?
Wait, hold on, Heidi. Hold on, Heidi.
No, I actually have a couple questions, quite a few, so I don't know if you want me to wait until you're
Yeah,
done with
let me,
it.
let me
All
run
right,
the
that's
slides
fine.
and then we'll go.
Yep.
So this is the model in one graphic organizer. And so it's now in a 4th edition. And so they changed from nouns to verbs. It's now define, manage, deliver, and assess. So we define school counseling through our student standards and professional standards, including a code of ethics. We manage, focus on the program with a whole bunch of artifacts, including use of time and an annual administrator agreement. We deliver primarily direct and indirect student services, and we assess our interventions through annual program assessment and through school counselor assessment and appraisal.
School counseling redesign, the data collection, our school counselors providing access skills. So the focus group protocol for school counselors, parents, developed by redesign committee completed. These are the things that we're looking to eventually check off this list here. Student survey protocol, developed by redesign committee, is in process. This is our school council time calculators for a 5-day period, which we talked about earlier, are going to be included in that report. School counseling program assessments for each middle and high school, 80% of them would have been returned. The annual calendar for every middle school, high school, school counseling program is currently in process. Weekly calendars for every middle school, high school, school counselor is in process. School counselors compared attendance, behavior grades, test scores to pre and post tests. Delivery of student success skills and classroom lessons are in process. School counselors deliver and discuss annual access accomplishments plan for every 6th to 12th grade student by December 2019 is in process. So next steps are to integrate discussion and recommendations for a school board workshop meeting into final report, which is what we're here tonight. Complete student surveys and integrate results into final report. Consider and approve new job descriptions for school counselors and director of school counseling. Review assignments and advise staff by June 1, 2021. The next point of working with building leaders to develop shared understanding of roles and responsibilities. I just want to make one comment about that. Having been a director of counseling, having been a school administrator, working and supervising counselors, oftentimes it was a benefit to the clinical team and school counselors that there was a common understanding and comprehension of what it took to play out the role of a school counselor. So what we talked during the committee meetings is that myself and other administrators who are Damon Lewis, Dr. Lewis was on the committee. Both myself and he have embraced that, charge of working with other administrators to help them understand the role of the counselor. And then finally, schedule the calendar for the remainder of 2019, 20 for department meetings and professional development. I think that's the last.
Mr. Barbas?
No?
We have multiple members.
Go ahead, Heidi.
All right, thank you so much for this. I think we've talked about this for a long time, and I think having this multi-year model is really, really beneficial. I mean, very, very helpful to have this kind of plan in place and having the implementation steps so we can actually look at that, visualize that, and also thanks to the committee that worked really hard on this. But just a couple of comments that I wanted to add. For year 2019 through 20, it was alarming to me to see that the school counseling department hasn't met as a team in 2 decades. So 20 years, that's really concerning. So I assume you haven't had those kind of meetings, but I'm sure that, I know Dan, I know that you converse with your group, but I think it's just so critically important to have those kind of team meetings on a regular basis. Moving down to day 1, 6 through 12, like having some type of plan in place for students 6th through 12th grade. I mean, it just really is so critical during the beginning middle school years and all the way through 12th grade. Day 2, just some highlights. Executive functioning, that's actually on day 3, but is so important for children. It's for adults, it's for everyone. It's just that organizational skills that you really need that will really help you, whether you're college or career, anywhere in life. But having those executive functioning skills are so important. Homework and study skills, and how to avoid those distractions. Because for many students, it's hard to find that quiet place that they can really hone in and do their work. So that's really very, very important. If we look at year 2, 2020 through 2021, thinking about career, resume, mock interviews, what was interesting when we had a group of you come up and you were kind of role-playing, kind of popped out of the page. So I'm reading it, and then when you all were talking about it in front of all of us, it made a huge impact. When you have that one-on-one dialogue when you're interviewing, it makes a big difference. So even for many of these mock interviews, even if for many of our students, if they're able to do it with their peers. So having those mock interviews, whether it's with a teacher or if it's a guidance counselor, but if you have that with your peers and getting... School counselor, but if you also have it with your peers though, with your school counselor, but I think it makes a difference. So if you have a student with a student and they're kind of interviewing each other, because when you're going on interviews, you know, you're interviewing that person as much as they're interviewing you for that job. So it's kind of a two-way street when you're doing that.
There's mutual benefit for
It
the
is.
students doing it and the students being interviewed.
Absolutely,
Yes.
because they're learning from their peers. So that was just for me a suggestion. As well as if we're moving down, coordinating the ACT and the SAT is so important. I know our counselors, again, do a stellar job on that, but kind of prepping them and preparing that because there's a lot of anxiety and angst that comes along with that, especially ahead of time. So kind of helping them before that would be helpful. The college fairs, I know that we have many of our college fairs, but also talking to some of our students ahead of time because they hear about it through their peers. But having that dialogue before, UConn is coming, Southern's coming, Princeton is down the road and they're coming and they're making an appearance here. I think preempting our students ahead of time is also helpful. And also, if I can make a final suggestion, during our open houses, you know, when elementary, middle, and high school, but especially now I'm thinking the high school, middle, and high school level, if we're able to have some of our counselors come, because, for example, my student, my child, I should say, she's in 11th grade now. This will be her 3rd school guidance counselor. For whatever reason, there have been changes, but having that continuity, so during an open house, popping in, let's say to journalism, Mr. Carl's class, having a counselor come in and say, "Hi, I'm Mr. Meek, nice to meet you, I'm gonna be your child's counselor," makes a huge, you have your new role, Mr. Meek? Thank you. It just makes that interaction so much easier for the parents that are involved, let alone the students, but also that comfort level with our parents.
It's a very strong recommendation that there be consistency
Yeah.
in school counselor assignments to stay with kids and loop up with kids.
And I've felt like I've always said that. I think it's just so important, whether it's my child, all the students that we have in all of our schools, but it's important that they can come to, let's say, Mr. Sullivan. No longer you, Dan, but let's say they were to come to you. It's just so important, that interaction. So they're having a really rough day. Something is happening at home. It's almost like an open door policy. And I know that we have that, but having that from 9th all the way 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, the continuity and the consistency for these students makes a huge impact in their lives, especially during the early high school years, and then that angst that they feel when they're thinking whether it's going into a career or they're going and visiting a college. But thank you for all this.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Barbara?
Thank you for this really excellent work. You're inspirational, and I know it's going to have a huge impact here in the district. I apologize for my voice. I have the same cold as my colleague. One of the things that I would like to see more tangibly, explicitly explained in the final report is how we're going to achieve on page 4, avoid assigning counselors inappropriate routine and clerical duties. I feel like I need to know what's going to happen. So 2 years ago, this board, my first budget cycle, we cut high school and middle school secretaries' support staff. So we may have made this crisis worse. And I don't see a recommendation for how we're going to address that. I also am very sympathetic to the workload of our administrators, especially they are trained to handle the disciplinarian incidents and work that we want to take off of the counselors so the counselors can be more available to build positive mentorship roles. So we don't want to overload our administrators. They're already extremely busy. So who's going to do this work that's 50% of these people's day? And if that could be explicitly in that 3-year plan laid out, it would really help me have that conversation with the BT and Common Council.
Julie?
Thank you. So I think this is something that really came up very loud and clear throughout the entire process and was concerning to every single person on the committee. And I think there are a number of pieces at play here. And I think one is the shift this year with scheduling in general has not been fully implemented yet because it's such a new piece for how some of that has been shifted, especially at the middle school levels. And so I think between now and when the final recommendations are made, I think there does need to be a little bit more digging into some root cause analysis potentially to figure out what are the different pieces, what are those pieces that counselors are currently taking on now, and then do we have existing resources, meaning people, time, money, and program that can take on some of those pieces or should be taking on those pieces that we can spin off at no cost. And are there additional pieces that we need to then think about? If bus duty is an ongoing issue, then who's doing the bus duty? So it's not directly tied to the counseling piece, but we know we still have an area to fill. And so I think it's going to be probably a number of different pieces depending what all of those time kind of important yet time suckers are on the counselor's time. And so there also might be some pieces related to assignment and enrollment, and we know this year has been different because of our continuing influx of students. But is this the new norm? Is this a one-time occurrence, or is this the new norm? And so how are we looking at registration and enrollment, which we know the counselors, at least when we met in September, they were completely bogged down by enrollment and registration information. And so thinking about, are there existing resources that we already have through different areas that should be better utilized, as well as are there additional pieces that we may need to budget for that are not directly related to counselors, but allow us to free up the time for the counselors.
Can I just follow up before Bruce jumps in? Is that okay? Thank you. Just a couple of points really quickly. I know that Norwalk Acts and the administration have been talking about a student dashboard and leveraging various possibilities and what kind of data would help us diagnose maybe early symptoms of something coming up for a student. And I'm wondering if we could be more explicit of our measurable data in the final report such that we can then move backwards and build a dashboard that has those built in for monitoring. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And then I just know from speaking to constituents that one of their biggest, as you talk about that college affordability piece, what I'm hearing so much from NCC is the problem of summer melt. A child applies to NCC, they intend to go, something happens in the family and they never make it. And then they're on a whole nother life trajectory. So I really hope that we, with last year's state budget, they passed free community college for every high school graduate in Connecticut. We need to make sure that we're creating a pipeline for those students that they know they don't have to melt. They're taken care of and they're handled.
That was, the affordability was.
But explicitly
was
that.
Very, very deeply discussed.
Yep.
In the work that Stuart led us through. That the way to do this is not necessarily student loans that make our kids come out with,
And they don't have to anymore.
hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt.
Bruce?
Yeah, just one point. I agree with Barbara and Julie. Those additional costs would have to be put into any plan if there are additional costs. But I would remind you, when we did have that discussion 2 years ago about reducing certain secretarial positions, Again, we were looking at data similar to this, and some of us were scratching our heads when we were comparing the level of secretarial services here compared to other districts, and it was a little bit more complicated than just laying folks off. There was more issues involved. What I find interesting in the entire evening is what is exactly going on in the elementary schools? What are the level of services? You just can't. You said, Yvette, of course we're not advocating full-time counselors for our elementary schools.
For every elementary school.
For every elementary school, and I'm going to ask, why not?
Well, twofold. One is, what is the deliverable and how much time does it take? We know that some of our schools are much smaller than other schools, and perhaps a shared person between two schools would be effective and able to do the deliverables. And other schools may, because of larger enrollments, require more full-time staff. I think we need to look at that, and we need to assess next year what that will look like so that we can come before you at the end of next year or in the winter of next year as you're building budget recommendations and have those discussions.
Yes.
I think the other issue there is the overlap between the role of the social worker and the psychologist.
I get that.
Now, in this case, we have a full-time social worker in every elementary school. And in many of our elementary schools, we have full-time psychologists. And so, I think we have to look at the role here and say, of the role that we want to cover, who is covering what and what is the need if there is a need. But very much unlike middle school or high schools, we have staffing of social workers and psychologists as far as in excess of what our middle or high schools have.
Oh, no, I agree. Don't get me wrong here, but I am saying there, in many ways, the problems in elementary schools, in many ways, are much more subtle and more complicated to deal with. And if they are, as we all know, if they are dealt with properly and in a comprehensive way, perhaps many of the issues that we're dealing with in middle school would be easier to deal with, or they wouldn't exist. That's my point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Can I just jump on that, piggyback? Going back to the data and the dashboard opportunity, to understand what the caseload is in each building, not just anecdotally, but to really look at what is our incidence of things, and then work back from the middle school, because I agree with you. I think we would have many fewer issues of behavior in the middle school if we had already identified and started providing support in the elementary level. And also, we all know, and I've spoken about this before, children create stories about themselves that they carry on into adulthood if we don't help them turn the story around. So when we allow them to get to 6th grade with carrying their chip or their baggage, we've done them a disservice. So I think we have to start working the problem back.
I just wanted to, go ahead.
All right, I just wanted to. I want to go back to the summer melt piece. So the school counselors will be trained in actually a book called Summer Melt, which gives very specific skills and techniques later in the year. But I want to go back to those 2 para positions are critical. If they are staffing year-round, those 2 folks then can supervise summer melt activities in the summer and dramatically reduce exactly what you're talking about.
Very cool.
I just wanted to make a brief comment about the perspective of the elementary school piece. We've had a lot of conversations during this process and this journey we've been on to develop this redesign about the need for counselors in all elementary schools. I don't think we ever really talked about that we shouldn't have them in all the elementary schools. But we, to be very strategically smart about it in terms of how to roll it out over time, Yvette's point was very well taken. I can tell you from experience, having been a secondary educator for many years and now being an elementary educator and administrator, I see very early on in kindergarten, even the preschool level, the needs, the great needs that our children have that require an exorbitant amount of wraparound services. The role of the social workers and school psychologists is very distinct to that of the school counselor. So that there is a need, there's no question about that. And I think in the wake of so many things going on in this world, in our state and our town, in terms of social emotional issues, and the focus on now trying to really develop our kids socially and emotionally in a way that we haven't had to do in so many years, we do need that focus in the elementary schools, because it's happening every day.
Okay, well, thank you, Julie. You have one last
Thanks.
comment?
Just a couple of reactions from after participating in the process, and a couple of reiterations that I want to make for the board, especially since when you all, those of you who will be here, when you vote on this, I will not be here. And so I'm just going to throw out a couple kind of reiterations. I think the importance of the central office person, the coordinator or director of the school counseling role, really came up as being absolutely crucial to being able to actually implement all of these pieces. And that person, and we have a draft job description for that person, really is a supervisor for all of the school counselors, but it also goes beyond that with being able to ensure that someone who actually understands what the counselors are expected to do every day is actually who's evaluating them and assessing them. And then there would be that indirect line to the building principal for their day-to-day management. But I think the importance of that position just came through loud and clear, especially from those who were the counselors, in addition to those who are building leaders in our school, saying, we're evaluating people, but we're not the experts in what we're supposed to be evaluating here. So I think that kind of the importance of that central office position is going to be incredibly crucial to not only be able to provide professional development and embedded coaching to our school counselors, but also to be able to actually implement the recommendations in the plan. I think the other piece that's come up in some of the comments that I just want to reiterate is the importance of that transition period in between elementary and middle school, and then middle to high school. And so really making sure that our teams from our elementary schools are communicating with those coming into middle school, so that middle school counselors don't start the year having no idea with which students they should already be checking in on, targeting, that may already be at risk. And same coming into high school, we don't lose that time where students may fall through the cracks because our counselors don't know who to target yet when you start the list with several hundred students in the new year. And I think the other piece that's important here is thinking about how we clarify, how we're consistent, and then how we clarify what those roles and responsibilities are of the school counselors. And I think that's going to take time, especially for those who've been in the system for a long time. The adults are going to have to change that practice. Parents are going to have to understand how they communicate with counselors differently. Students, there may be a transition process as well. Hopefully it'll be easier for students, but it's going to be a transition process. But it's going to go from everyone from central office to building principals to individual teachers are going to have to learn what these new roles and responsibilities are. In addition, the counselors themselves are going to have to kind of get out of some of their old habits that they've naturally fallen into as well. When you're trained to be empathetic and help support and provide those services, when you see a need in a building, you jump in because that's your natural ability. And so how to monitor themselves to not fall into some of the same places for how we've ended up where we are now. I think those kind of roles and responsibilities, clarifications, and consistency, especially across the district, are going to be incredibly important to make sure that any of these recommendations can be implemented with fidelity.
I totally agree. Can I just jump on for 1 second?
Okay, but we've been at this now for an hour and 40 minutes.
Okay. I was just going to jump on and say that CES has new professional development programs for teachers to develop self-care plans, and that we could consider engaging with them to provide that service to the counselors.
And one last thing I just piggyback on, which really wasn't in the purview of the work you did, but we really need to, right now we only register our kids once, which is in kindergarten, and we have talked at length about having re-registration in 6th grade and re-registration in 9th grade, and we haven't, we know there's a cost involved, and how would we do it, and we haven't really gotten to that stage. But obviously, based on your second point, Julie, as you're working on that transition from one level of school to another, that could all happen at once, one would think, although it sounds like counselors won't be doing registration, but somehow we need to coordinate that, and that really should be probably part of this implementation, because we need to do that. Our registration's going through the roof, and we know there are all sorts of challenges, and we need to, we've been talking about this now for a couple of years, and it's time we do it.
Thank you.
So, one more thing for you to do.
I do want to end with a great thank you to the members of the committee that are here. Bless you again, Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, everybody. I know this has been a pet peeve of mine, that we needed to really rework this, and I talked to Dr. Adamowski many a times, and I'm really glad this took place. And I didn't speak a lot tonight, but unlike some of these people, I actually had a kid who went through the system and really did need support, some of which he got, some of which he didn't. So I'm very, very sympathetic to what you did and what needs to be done. Okay. We'll now go to public comments, if there are any. Typically, there aren't after workshops, but if there are public comments by anybody, going once, going twice, I guess we will not be having any public comments.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Lyons.
I'd like to move to add 2 items to the agenda. Number 1 would be a West Rocks Middle School trip to Nature's Classroom, and number 2 would be discussion of pending claims and litigation.
Okay, in executive session?
Well, the latter would be in executive
Yes,
session.
okay. Yes, Dr. Kimmel.
Would we need to suspend the rules to do the vote for a 2/3 vote?
Yes.
To do this?
No. No, under FOI, we need a 2/3
We
vote
need
to
a
approve
2/3
this.
vote.
Okay.
And we would also need a 2/3 vote to go into exec session separately.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, we have a unanimous vote. We'll take a 5-minute break.
Well, might I suggest, Mr. Chairman, I think we can
Oh, okay,
this
yep.
first, and then we can take a break and have the exec
Okay,
session.
perfect.
So put it on discussion. I'll move that we approve the West Rocks school trip to Nature's Classroom that has been handed out to the board.
Yep, seconded by Sarah Lemieux. Any discussion?
Why are we getting it so late?
There was an error at the school level. The person that has been handling this retired, a new person is handling it. They were not as, they thought someone else was submitting it. Anyway, Mr. Reynolds has reviewed this, made changes, and it will not happen again. It was a mistake.
Thank you.
And the timing of it is, if we waited until
Oh,
the
no.
meeting, the trip would be over.
They have to go. You don't mess with me.
Okay, so
Make a motion to
all in
approve the
favor?
field trip.
No, we did? Okay, all in favor? Yep. Unanimous.
Okay.
Thank you. A motion to go
I'll
into
move to
executive
go into
session.
executive session for the purpose of discussing pending claims and litigation.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Meek. All in favor? Unanimous, and we'll take a 5-minute break.